What if I told you that a single breakfast on a rainy, stormy morning could change not just one life, but two? A struggling single dad, a terrified woman with nowhere to turn, and one small act of kindness that set off a chain of events neither of them could have imagined. This isn't just a story about food or money. It's about hope, second chances, and the invisible ways compassion can transform lives. Watch till the end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Welcome to Radiant Story and Tales. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. The rain came without warning, drumming hard against the windows of a small coastal cafe in Portland. Outside, the streets were rivers, cars splashing through puddles, and the wind whipped the umbrellas of people who had braved the storm. Inside the cafe, usually alive with chatter and clinking cups, felt empty and quiet. At a corner table, a man sat alone. His name was Eli Turner, a single father with worn-out hands and tired eyes. For weeks, he had been scraping by on instant noodles and stale bread. But today, he had finally saved enough to order a proper breakfast. A plate of eggs, toast, and bacon that smelled like a small victory. He lifted his fork, ready to savor the first bite, when the door opened with a gust of wind and rain. A woman stumbled in, soaked through, hair plastered her face, eyes wide with fear. She moved as if the storm had followed her inside, and the quiet cafe seemed heavier with her presence. Her clothes were torn, her lips pale, and her hands trembled. She barely whispered when the waitress asked what she needed. "Help, please," she said, almost swallowed by the rain. Eli froze. He didn't know why he felt an urge to move toward her. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was a memory of his daughter, Lila, who had once told him, "Daddy, helping someone is like giving them your sunshine." Eli didn't know if he could change the world, but he could offer her warmth, a small piece of kindness in the middle of the storm. He stood up, plate still in his hands. "Here," he said softly, walking toward her. "You need this more than I do." The woman's fingers shook as she reached for food. Her eyes, filled with exhaustion and heartbreak, softened when she touched the plate. She didn't just look hungry. She looked as though the world had forgotten her entirely. She ate quickly, tears mixing with the raindrops still clinging to her cheeks. Eli sat across from her, without touching anything, watching to make sure she didn't collapse. Her name, when she finally whispered it, was Aria. She didn't explain where she came from, what had happened, or why she seemed to be running from something. Eli didn't push. He knew silence could hold more stories than words ever could. The storm outside began to calm, but her breathing remained uneven. Eli called Lila's school to let them know he'd be late picking her up, then offered Aria his jacket. At first, she refused, shaking her head, but he gently draped it around her shoulders. Her eyes widened, like someone seeing sunlight after years in darkness. For the next hour, they sat in quiet company. Slowly, Aria began to relax, her posture softening, though a shadow of fear lingered behind her eyes. She told Eli she had no money, no phone, no belongings except a small sketchbook she clutched tightly. Eli offered her his spare change for another meal later, even though it meant he'd have to skip dinner. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice fragile but sincere. When she finally stood to leave, Eli felt an unease he couldn't explain. She paused at the door, looking back once, eyes glimmering with something he couldn't name. Then she vanished into the clearing day, leaving him with a mix of worry and hope. Eli never saw Aria again, at least not immediately. But the impact of that morning, that small act of sharing a meal and offering kindness, would return him in ways he could never have imagined. Weeks passed, but Eli couldn't shake the memory of that rainy morning. The image of Aria, shivering, fragile, clutching her sketchbook, haunted him between work, bills, and caring for Lila. He wondered where she had gone, what had driven her into that storm, and if she had found even a moment of safety since then. Then one afternoon, a sleek, official-looking envelope arrived at his small apartment. The kind of envelope he had only seen in movies, thick, embossed with lettering that made his heart tighten. Hands shaking, Eli tore it open, half expecting a summons or a notice of some kind of trouble he didn't understand. But inside was something else entirely, A letter from a law firm. Mr. Turner, it began formally. We request your presence at the Hawthorne and Clay firm regarding a matter of personal and urgent importance concerning Miss Aria Wells. Eli's breath hitched. Aria Wells, Aria. His mind raced. Questions tumbled over each other. Was she safe? Was something wrong? Why was he involved? The next morning, after dropping Lila at school, Eli took the bus across the city to a towering glass building that seemed almost unreal compared to the small, cozy life he lived. Inside, the marble floors and polished surfaces reflected a world he didn't belong to, suits and shoes that gleamed, voices measured and calm. He felt exposed, out of place, a man whose jeans were worn, whose jacket had patches where the fabric was thinning, and whose hands bore the marks of years of hard labor. An assistant guided him to a quiet conference room. Eli's stomach twisted with worry as two attorneys entered and set a thick folder in front of him. Mr. Turner. The older one began, "We represent Miss Aria Wells." Eli swallowed hard. "Is she okay?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "She is safe," the attorney replied, gently. "Thanks in large part to you." Relief surged through Eli, quickly tangled with confusion. "I don't understand. Why me?" The younger attorney slid a photograph across the table. Eli blinked. It showed Aria smiling brightly, dressed elegantly, standing outside a prestigious gallery. She looked nothing like the frightened woman who had stumbled into the cafe. Ms. Wells is a renowned photographer and the sole heir to a substantial family trust, the attorney explained. But she recently endured a traumatic confrontation that threatened her safety and her work. After that, she disappeared, refusing assistance or protection. For weeks, she was entirely alone. Eli's mind raced, memories of that stormy morning colliding with this new reality. The woman he had helped had been hiding from danger, from people who wanted to exploit her, and she had carried the weight of it all silently. The older attorney continued. When she had nothing, when she felt like a ghost in the world, you gave her food, warmth, and recognition. You treated her like a human being, not a burden. That small act gave her hope when she had lost everything. Eli's chest tightened. I didn't do anything special, he said. Anyone could have helped her. She tells us, the younger attorney said softly, that most people didn't. You were the only one who did. Eli's hand shook as the attorneys opened the folder further, revealing documents and a note from Aria herself. She had instructed them to deliver a gift, something that would help Eli and Lila, a chance to build the life he had been struggling for. You've given her more than you know, the older attorney said, placing a hand gently on the folder. She wants you to have stability, a future, and a way to pursue the life you deserve. She has created a grant in your name to cover housing, living expenses, and your daughter's education for the next 3 years. She said, and I quote, "He gave me a meal when I felt like a ghost. So I want to give him back his future." Eli stared at the folder, disbelief and gratitude warring in his chest. A single breakfast, a simple act of kindness, had changed everything, not just for Aria, but for him and Lila. He left the law firm with the folder clutched tightly, stepping out into the daylight. The streets of Portland seemed warmer somehow, brighter, though the drizzle from earlier still hung in the air. Eli felt hope for the first time in years, and an overwhelming responsibility to honor the gift Aria had given him. That afternoon, he called Lila to tell her they would be moving into a new apartment, a safe space where she could grow and laugh freely. For the first time, Eli allowed himself to imagine a life beyond survival, a life of possibilities, dreams, and quiet happiness. And though he didn't know if Aria would ever return or if he would see her again, he carried the lesson of that stormy morning with him, that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could foresee. After that meeting with the attorneys, life for Eli Turner slowly began to change. The grant Aria had set up in his name wasn't just money. It was a lifeline. For the first time in years, he could breathe without the constant weight of bills pressing down on him. He found a small, sunlit apartment near the waterfront. It wasn't extravagant, but the roof didn't leak, the walls didn't groan, and Lila had her own little corner filled with books and toys. For the first time in a long time, Eli didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he could actually live. Each morning, as he watched Lila get ready for school, he felt a quiet gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. He still remembered the way Aria had looked that day in the cafe, fragile, beaten down, but still human. Her courage to reach out, even indirectly, had given him and his daughter a second chance. Eli also enrolled in a technical drafting program, something he had dreamed of years ago but had never been able to afford. The classes were challenging, but every time he sat at a drafting table, pencils and blueprints spread before him, he felt alive again. It was a reminder that life could be more than bills, work, and constant worry. It could be creation, possibility, and progress. Lila, too, began to flourish. She made new friends, started drawing again, and laughed with a lightness that had been missing for far too long. At night, Eli would watch her sleep and think about the chain of events that had led them here. A single act of kindness, shared with someone who had needed it more than anyone else. Despite all this, Eli's mind often wandered back to Aria. He wondered where she was, whether she had found peace, and if the shadow of her trauma had finally lifted. He revisited the cafe occasionally, sitting at the corner table by the window, imagining her shivering there during the storm. He hoped she had found warmth and safety, though he never expected to see her again. And then one rainy evening, though not nearly as fierce as the day they had first met, Eli received a short, unexpected message through the law firm. It wasn't from Aria directly, as she was still in recovery, but it was enough to bring tears to his eyes. The message simply said that she was healing, that she remembered his kindness, and that she wanted him to continue living boldly, for himself and for Lila. Eli realized that kindness wasn't a single act or a moment. It was a bridge. One small gesture could ripple out, touching lives in ways that could never be measured. He began to understand that his breakfast that morning had been more than just a meal. It had been a lifeline for someone lost, and in return it had saved him and his daughter in ways he could never have imagined. Yet life wasn't all smooth sailing. Challenges remained. School projects, late-night shifts, the occasional worry about unexpected expenses. But the fear that had once suffocated him was gone. It had been replaced by determination, hope, and an awareness of the fragile beauty of human connection. He carried this lesson everywhere. That small acts of compassion could hold the power to reshape destinies. One night, as Eli tucked Lila into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, innocent eyes and said, "Daddy, do you think the world is full of people like you?" He paused, considering how to answer. "I don't know if everyone is," he said finally, smiling softly, "but the world is full of people who can be, if they choose to help." Lila grinned, snuggling into her blanket. "Then I'm going to help people too," she whispered. Eli kissed her forehead, thinking about Aria, the storm, the cafe, and that simple plate of food that had started everything. In that moment, he understood something profound. The world could be harsh, unfair, and unpredictable, but kindness, pure, unselfish kindness, was a force that could cut through even the darkest clouds. Eli decided to carry that lesson into every part of his life. He volunteered at local shelters, gave extra food to people struggling on the streets, and always remembered the day he met a scared, trembling woman in the storm. Each act, no matter how small, was a reminder of how much difference one person could make. And through it all, the memory of Aria lingered, not as a burden or a worry, but as a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unseen ways lives intertwine. Eli had given her a meal. She had given him a future. And in that quiet, reciprocal exchange, he had discovered something both simple and extraordinary, the power of being human, fully and compassionately human. Months had passed since that rainy morning in the cafe, and life for Eli Turner and his daughter Lila had settled into a quiet rhythm of stability and hope. Their small apartment overlooked the harbor, where seagulls wheeled through the sky and the gentle waves lapped against the docks. It wasn't a palace, but it was theirs, a safe place filled with laughter, books, and the smell of home-cooked meals. Eli had grown in ways he never anticipated. He was thriving in his drafting program, sketching lines and plans that once lived only in his dreams. The stress of survival no longer pressed on his shoulders the way it used to, and Lila, now smiling more freely than she had in years, seemed to carry a piece of her father's newfound peace wherever she went. Yet, even amidst this calm, Eli often thought of Aria. He wondered how she was recovering, whether she had truly found peace after the trauma that had brought her to that stormy morning in Portland. He hoped she was creating again, capturing the beauty of life through her camera lens, and finding the same sense of hope and purpose he had discovered. One Saturday afternoon, Eli walked with Lila along the waterfront, their hands clasped tightly, when he spotted something familiar. A figure standing near the edge of the pier, sketchbook in hand, gazing at the water. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? But the figure moved, then disappeared into the crowd before he could be sure. Eli let out a quiet breath, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. He realized something important. He didn't need to see her again to understand the impact of what had happened. Her presence in his life had been brief, almost fleeting, but its effect was profound, permanent, and life-changing. That evening, Eli sat at the small dining table with Lila. They shared a modest dinner, but it felt full, not just of food, but of gratitude, of safety, and of the quiet knowledge that life had shifted in their favor because of one act of compassion. He thought of Aria and how fragile and scared she had been, and he smiled, knowing that somewhere she was healing, thriving, and remembering him not as a stranger, but as a lifeline in her darkest hour. Over the next months, Eli continued to live with intention. He volunteered at local shelters, helped neighbors who struggled like he once had, and always carried a sense of awareness that one small gesture, a warm meal, a shared coat, a listening ear, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways unimaginable. And sometimes, when the rain fell and the streets glistened on the gray sky, Eli would think back to that morning. He would remember the trembling woman who had stumbled into his life, the way she had accepted his kindness, and the note of gratitude that had arrived weeks later through the law firm. It was a reminder that human connection, even brief and unexpected, could be transformative. Eli often whispered a quiet thanks to Aria, though she could not hear him, not for the money or the grant, though they had changed his life, but for the lesson she had unwittingly taught him, that compassion matters, that hope can be restored, and that every person has the power to change another life with simple, heartfelt actions. As Eli tucked Lila into bed one night, she looked up at him with a bright smile. "Daddy," she said, "you think helping people really makes a difference?" Eli paused, considering the weight of that question. "Yes, Lila," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Even one small act can change the world for someone, and sometimes it changes your world too." Lila smiled, drifting into sleep, and Eli sat by the window, gazing out at the harbor lights reflecting on the water. He thought of Aria and the storm, the cafe, and the plate of food he had offered. He understood now that life's true treasures were not things or money. They were the moments when human hearts connected, when kindness bridged the gap between despair and hope. The city hummed softly in the night, but Eli felt something stronger than the noise around him. He felt peace, he felt purpose, and he felt a deep, enduring gratitude for his daughter, for life, and for the woman who had reminded him of the extraordinary power of simple, selfless kindness. And though he may never see Aria again, her presence would always linger in his heart, a quiet, luminous reminder that even a single breakfast, shared in a storm, could change everything.